India hosted the mega G20 summit. It was an important milestone for India and Indian diplomacy. With me is one of the key architect of the G20 presidency of India, Dr. S. Jaishankar, India's External Affairs Minister. Sir, welcome to WION. And the first question to you is, how important and momentous occasion was this, the hosting of the summit? How does it add heft to India at a time of geopolitical flux and the emergence of the New Delhi consensus?
Sidhant, first of all, very good to be with you. And I would say, yes, no question, this was a very, very important summit. Because after all, what is the G20? It is the 20 most powerful economies of the world. And on top of that, we had 9 guests, 14 international organizations. So I would say the importance and the influence of the countries concerned, this was in our history the most crucial international gathering that we had ever done. What is its relevance today? I think it has a very strong relevance because you're seeing today a world order under stress. You're also seeing a world order in transformation. The two are somewhat different. So you can see there's a east-west polarization, there's a growing north-south divide. A lot of countries are under pressure because of debt, because of economic concerns, because their sustainable development goals progress has slowed down. There are people who are struggling with climate actions, climate events. So given a background of a very, very disturbed international environment, I think it was very important that this meeting took place and that this meeting was successful, because what it has done is really it's kind of generated a sense of optimism today for diplomacy, because diplomacy for the last few years has been a very depressed profession, I must tell you.
So moving on to the challenge of the joint statement, there were questions whether it will come or it will be difficult. So if you can perhaps give some insight as to how this miracle to many, to use the word, happened, in a sense that the joint statement came, the consensus, how did it emerge?
Within the realms of what is publicly disclosable, I would say, at one level, there was always the belief this was G20. There's never been a G20 summit without a statement. But of course, the G20 has never faced the kind of problems that it has. At the same time, we were also confident. We are India. Our relationships with the other G19 are very strong. They will surely appreciate why the Indian presidency must be successful. And then at a third level, I think you never take in diplomacy anything for granted. So, the negotiators were working to bridge the gaps, to find the formulations, to close out the positions. If they hit a roadblock, which they did in the last, it would always happen, then they would take it up, sometimes come to me on occasion if necessary, which happened finally in the last day of the summit. I had to go to even to the Prime Minister on certain issues. So all of that, came together. In terms of how did it happen, I would say, there were certain countries, certainly, Brazil, South Africa, India, clearly in the lead, Indonesia to some extent. I think you can say the countries in the middle took a lot of initiative in trying to find a common landing ground. But again, I would give credit to the entire G20. I mean, this wouldn't have happened if every one of the G20 countries didn't feel that need to step up and, come together.
So there was this Ukraine challenge as well. We saw the final document mentioning Ukraine, extensive mention. Do you see the West somehow backing out? I mean, the statement wasn't something that saw any condemnation against Russia? I
think there's a very misplaced debate that somehow, you are successful if you have managed to replicate what was done last year. Last year was last year. This year is this year. Many things have happened in between. Common sense would tell you that you would want all those issues included. After all, in any other activity, today we are sitting on the 13th of September. You would not like on 13th of September 2023 that you sum up a situation which was there, say 13th of September 2022. You will want to capture everything out there. Now, if you have to capture everything, you will have to come up with a new mix of issues, and obviously with its own formulations. And I think certainly people wanted to capture the Black Sea grain corridor. They wanted to capture the concerns about the food infrastructure. They wanted to capture the fact that there was a dialogue taking place. So all those became new elements. If something came in, the rest of it has to accommodate it. No? So I think this way of reading it, saying there's a departure from the past. Yes, there is. But then also please see what is new. You can't get new things if you don't give up some old things.
The role of the developing countries, we have successive presidencies which are countries of the South, Indonesia, India, South Africa, Brazil. Role of these countries together to make sure that the consensus emerged.
Look, to some extent it was a convergence of outlook, that these countries thought in a similar way. But to some extent it's a coincidence. We succeeded Indonesia, Brazil is succeeding us, South Africa is coming after that. So you had 4 developing country presidencies also. So that was also a factor. But it was both. It was also a meeting of minds.
How was India able to bring the voice of the global South on the table, at the high table when the summit happened? We saw a number of countries from the global South, in fact, maximum number of countries in any G20 presidency present at the table.
I think there were 2-3 aspects to it. One was we ourselves consciously decided that we would invite countries from the global South as our guests. That's our prerogative. So you had many more global South countries than before in the G20. The second development, of course, was that in a sense, by doing the voice of the global South, the summit in January, we really shone the spotlight on the global South, and it needed to be done because the global. Let me tell you, I travel a reasonable amount. Countries in Africa and Latin America and Central America and Asia and Pacific, they were very, very upset. I would say even angry in some respects at the fact that these years of COVID, the consequences of conflict, that somewhere they've just been left out. That their interest, their pain, their concerns was not captured. So our effort was really to get all of that in, and I think we succeeded to a great measure.
And India invited a number of countries, in fact 9 countries. What was the idea of inviting these countries? All of them, I believe, were countries of the global South.
Well, no, some of them were actually countries who traditionally attend, I mean, I don't know if you'd count Singapore as global South anymore. Certainly Netherlands or Spain, they have a tradition of attending, but we did invite some of the others, Egypt, Mauritius, Nigeria. So these were some examples.
Big focus was on Africa, African Union becoming member of the G20. How does it shows India prioritizing its relationship with the African continent?
I think today that will certainly be seen. It's my understanding from our own embassies, that's how it is seen, as India batting for Africa. The fact is that actually over the last decade, our development commitments to Africa have increased. Our training and capacity building exchanges with Africa have increased. The bulk of our new embassies which have been set up, Prime Minister gave approval for 18 embassies in Africa. I think we set up 15 or 16 by now. And even during the COVID, I mean, Africa saw us step forward. So what has happened is that that sense has grown in Africa that, look, India is with you. And certainly for us, it's a historical bonding. There's a lot of emotion in our feeling, in our relationship. I think it was, I regard it as in a sense, a kind of a ethical outlook that, to me, it's very similar to what we are doing now in India. That in India, the commitment leaving no one behind, that the most poor, the most vulnerable, the most neglected areas should be brought up to speed. They should be given special care. They should be given opportunity. That's what our domestic policy is about. So what we are doing at home, we are also trying to do in foreign policy.
And I believe it was Prime Minister's personal endeavor as well to make sure that African Union becomes, because he reached out.
Very much so. Very much so. In fact, it started last year when President Macky Sall of Senegal, told him that, look, our case, nobody's hearing us. And Prime Minister assured him that we will, our turn, our presidency is coming, we will do something for you. So what he did after some thought was, he wrote himself to all the other members and said that, look, India believes that we should make African Union a member, so I hope you will concur. And they all did. But it needed somebody, it needed somebody strong, clear, I would say a believer to take that plunge.
I believe in last 4 years, a lot of momentum with Africa. We have seen how you were in Africa several times, you were in Tanzania, and a lot of capacity building in Uganda and IIT being set up. But sir, moving on the G20 aspect, the consensus, were there any attempts by the Chinese to sabotage the perhaps conversations? We have seen any reports?
No, I think we had, again, I repeat to you, every one of the G20 countries contributed. Otherwise, we wouldn't have got the agreement, the unanimity which we did. Yes, there were meetings when there were differences of views, especially in the ministerial meetings. But I think by the time the summit came together, people were of a very positive bent of mind, and I don't think it is, fair to really cast any country in a negative light. I think everybody really did their bit to accommodate, to understand, to find some way forward.
Absence of the Chinese president, do you think it impacts?
Look, I think that's their decision, who represents them.
So climate change was another aspect. How does the G20 summit, the Delhi G20 summit, give direction or a new narrative to dealing with the issue of climate change, something that has been a pressing issue for the world?
There's a big segment you would have seen in the outcome document about a Green Development Pact. And the whole issue is how to resource climate action and climate justice. That's really where the focus has been, and we'll have to now take that forward.
So another big focus was the connectivity project that was announced. How do you see it being a game changer for the region and for India, Middle East, West Asia and Europe?
Well, I think it's a very, very significant initiative because at one level it's rooted very deeply in tradition. For hundreds, thousands of years, people have been traversing this route from India to Europe and back through the Gulf, through the Arabian Peninsula. So there's a long tradition, but it stopped for a variety of historical reasons. It has reduced, you can say. Today, I think we have the circumstances, the fact that all the countries involved, which you mentioned, they all are interested in reviving this tradition, but reviving it in a modern way, So we are really looking at an economic corridor, which will be partly maritime, partly railway. There'll be other aspects for it, not just logistics, different aspects of economic activity. So I think it's an enormously promising initiative. Obviously, we'll have to work very hard and see how to take it forward.
Any details regarding the finances, any deadline, dateline?
No, look, I think you've had an agreement in principle right now, so you'll have to be a little bit patient.
it's being welcomed by the Russian president as well, something we saw yesterday. But it's being seen as something which is counter to the Chinese Belt and Road initiative.
I would urge you to see things positively rather than see everything negatively in terms of countering other people. I mean, I think this is an initiative of very important countries who all see good in it for themselves. They're not doing it because they're against somebody and something. They're doing it because they are for something.
So my last question to you is, India is still part of the Troika, the governance system of the G20.
Sure.
How does...
we are still presidency of G20.
We're holding the session as well. Any details?
Well, we are still president till the end of November.
Any details on the sessions, or we planning?
Oh, you mean the
virtual session?
No, not yet.
But essentially, when it comes to the governance system, the Troika, how do we plan to take forward the conversation when it comes to the Brazilian presidency?
You know, that's a very smooth tradition. We were already a year before part of the Troika with Indonesia. So what happens is there is this culture in the G20 that, you know, the president before and the president after with the current presidency, they all sit and work together. So we've already done one part of it. We are more or less at the end of the second part, so we will very smoothly go into the third. And the real idea is that the initiatives should not have a shelf life limited to one presidency. That it allows for a very smooth movement on to the next one, and hopefully the next one after that. You share experiences, you really bring, you support each other in this. So we received, I must say, tremendous support from the Troika, and we will surely, pay that back in full measure and more. I mean, I think, and I again would say, look, for a country like India today, it's not just being part of a Troika. I mean, we, as this summit has demonstrated, we've really gone up to a different level. Our influence is more, our ability to shape the agenda is more, the expectations of us are more, our responsibilities are more. So yes, certainly we'll be part of the Troika next year, but I would say even after that, within the G20, in other international groupings and organizations, in world affairs in general, I think this G20 has sent out a very clear message that India under Prime Minister Narendra Modi is ready, is capable, is willing to really do more, shoulder more, contribute more. I think that's a message which everybody, all the G20 countries, all the others, the invitees, the international organizations, they've all carried away from the summit.
And so how did Prime Minister give direction to the entire presidency? I believe Prime Minister has met the ME officials as well.
Yes, he was good enough to come yesterday to the G20 Secretariat. It was frankly a bit of a surprise for us because the Secretariat was holding its own meeting. Then I said I'll drop by. And then when I went there, I was told, well, there's a possibility the Prime Minister may also drop by and thank people. And he came there, he was good enough to spend some time, but, very typically he used it, he took feedback from people, their impressions, what could be different, what did they feel is a learning from the whole experience. But through this entire process, I would say we were enormously helped by the fact that there was the vision, I would say the ambition of the Prime Minister in taking forward the G20. A lot of the concepts were his, the idea that we do it in so many cities, we do it in this way, projecting our culture, our traditions, involving, he was not happy with just officials meeting in rooms. For him, what was the impact of that on the world? So he encouraged us, to take it out, to involve universities, colleges, professional organizations, and then when it came, and again, if you look at a lot of the initiatives specifically, the Lifestyle for Environment initiative, the Women-led Development initiative, the millets issue, A lot of these have his personal imprint. I mean, he spent really a lot of time thinking it through, planning it, motivating us, sometimes I'd say pushing us really to do that. And it could be big things, it could be very, very, very fine details. But you always had that sense that, look, he was there. And as I said, in the last few hours when we hit those last few roadblocks, I went to him in some cases and said, it would help us if you talk to a counterpart leader, and he was always willing.
Internally in the MEA as well, we saw a lot of capacity building, in the sense that I saw a lot of young officers at the Bharat Mandapam. But my last question, I've already asked the last question, is how will history remember the Delhi G20 summit?
I think history would remember it as a inflection point in a sort of graph of a rising India, that people would say, yes, this was one of those big moments when, whether it was shaping the agenda, whether it was creating a consensus, whether it was our organizational capability, whether it was demonstrating technology or culture. So this was India at its best, really stepping forward and doing something much bigger. And as you say, the expectations of a lot of people was that we wouldn't be able to pull it off, which we showed we could, and not just could, but I mean, if I may say so myself, we did it very, very smoothly. But I think G20 will also, if you were to write a G20 history, not a India history, I think anybody writing a G20 history would say this was probably one of the most substantive G20s, that the kind of issues, reform of multilateral banks, handling debt, green development, food security, women-gender divide, mapping of skills. So we've really taken on some very, very consequential issues. These issues will determine the world's future in the next decade. So I think our history will remember us well, but surely the G20 history will also remember us.
Thank you so much, sir, for speaking to WION. It was a pleasure speaking to you, and you, of course, are showing the India way. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you. Pleasure.